Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and in this video we're going to talk about how to care for and breed the Red Devil and Midas Cichlid. Now I know these are two different and distinct species, but we're going to be sharing footage with you that we've accumulated over the last couple years, and we're going to go over the complete life cycle of these fish. This is a great story. It's one of a mistaken identity. It's a story about a fish I did not want once I found out what they were. It's a story about a fish that intrigued my curiosity and then gained my respect. And ultimately, it's a story about a fish I fell in love with over the last couple years, and I want to share that story with you, so stay tuned. The story starts in mid-July of 2017. I bought some fish that were labeled Firemouth Cichlids from a local club meeting. I suspect these fish were probably born sometime in mid-June. A couple weeks later, I'm starting to get a little suspicious because these fish are growing a lot faster than Thrichthys normally grow. In fact, we had some Maculopinus right next door in the tank in this 10-gallon to the right, and these fish were outgrowing them. I became a little suspicious. As we fast forward into October of 2017, clearly these are not Firemouth Cichlids, and I began to suspect that they were something else, and based on their size and coloration, I identified them as Red Devil Cichlids, Amphilophus labiatus. We can see here we have got 6 of them in this 10-gallon. We started with slightly more, but the aggression was already starting to show. What was interesting is that these brown spots would eventually disappear. So up to this point, I was not a big fan of large tank-busting South and Central American cichlids. I really had no interest in keeping these fish until their personalities started to intrigue me a little bit, and I got interested in these fish because even from a young age, they were very engaged with me when I would walk by the tank, when I would feed them, and they showed really awesome personality. So I decided to keep the fish that I had left, but I knew they were going to need a larger tank. So when we built out the wall on the fish room, we set aside a 40-gallon breeder for them. This is now January of 2018, so they're somewhere around 6 months old or so. And you can see here, this is actually Roger. And for those of you who've watched the channel a while, you know who Roger is. He's kind of hanging out here in this 40-gallon breeder with the other fish that are hiding behind the sponge filter. And we finally got them in a more sizable tank. This was just kind of a first attempt to set something up to allow them to grow out a little bit larger. We fast forward yet again, and here we are in February. You can see that now that they're in a larger tank, they're growing quite big. So here we've got Roger, and I believe right over here is Ruby. And so we've seen these fish before in more recent videos. The fish on the right was another, what I believe to be at the time, Red Devil male. Red Devils come from Lake Nicaragua, Lake Managua, while the Midas Cichlid shares a lot of the overlapping ranges. They are usually from the San Juan River and also from Nicaragua. The Red Devils and the Midas Cichlids look a little bit different, and we'll get into that in a moment. They are true and distinct separate species. So here, as we start to go further, we can see now we are into June of 2018. So these fish are a year old, and we've got we still have the group together. Roger's there, Ruby's there, the other Red Devil male is also there. At this point, by the time we're getting into July, again, a little over a year old, Roger is becoming a little bit more dominant at this point. He doesn't appreciate this other Red Devil male being here, and so eventually I had to separate these fish. Now, when it comes to their look, the Midas Cichlid tends to be a little bit more taller bodied. The lips aren't as big on the Midas Cichlids. The Midas Cichlids, the species name is Amphilophus citrinellus. And there are some important differences. At this point, I began to suspect that maybe these were not Red Devils, but again, I wanted to give it more time to determine whether or not they were actually Red Devils or Midas Cichlids. This white fish that you see here, we actually still have him. He is in the 125-gallon. I'll show you an updated video of him here in a moment. But these were great fish, but they were becoming more aggressive as they got older. Now, as we move into this is basically September of 2018. At this point, this was about the last time that these fish were together. Roger was now taking the other male and kind of pushing him off to the corner. This smaller fish was beginning to get bullied, so we had to remove him as well. And so we needed to separate these fish from one another. Now, in terms of water parameters, We have our fish room right around an 8.2 pH. These fish do really well right around neutral, but they have handled and have in fact bred in a pH as high as 8.2. We keep our fish room right around 78 degrees. Our water is relatively hard with a hardness of around 10 degrees or somewhere around 170 to 200 parts per million depending on the tank. And like I said, they've been doing fairly well with that. There is a significant difference between males and females, as you can see here. The males get larger, anywhere around the foot to 14-inch mark, and the females will stay slightly smaller, so somewhere in that 8, 9, maybe 10-inch mark. The males also get that large, pronounced nuchal hump. Now, more recently, I was actually able to confirm. I went through and looked at a lot of the breeding records for our club. I talked to the person who actually bred these fish. These are, in fact, Amphilophus citrinellus, the Midas Cichlid. Again, there's a lot of overlap between the two. It gets very confusing if you look on the internet and trying to identify them at an early age. It's quite difficult to do. As they get a little bit older, again, I'm looking at Roger and that more thick-bodied, tall-bodied sort of fish. The fact that both of the males and the females are lacking those larger lips, which can be lost in captivity anyway, but based on the records that we have at our club, based on talking with the person who actually bred them, and speaking with someone else who had just recently bred them as well, right around the same time I did, these are in fact Amphilophus citrinellum, the Midas Cichlid, not the Red Devil Amphilophus labiatus. And again, like I said, with the breeding that's been going on, there are a lot of color morphs. There's differences in the way the bodies appear. So I think, in some cases the genetics might be a little bit odd for a lot of the fish that we see at the local pet stores. So this is a little bit later when Roger and Ruby are two Midas Cichlids now. They have got the 40-gallon to themselves. And again, this is a time when you have to be really careful and keep an eye on them, making sure that the male does not bully the female. We fast forward recently, we moved them in a 75-gallon. We freed up some space. We moved them in a 75-gallon knowing they would need a larger tank, and this happened. So they decided to rearrange the tank. It looked really nice when we first put them in, but they made this giant cave structure out of one of the decorations, moved the plants around a little bit, and they laid some eggs. And the eggs were there for around 3 days or so, and then they moved the little tiny juveniles to a pit in the substrate, and I saw the little tails wagging out, and at that point, both the male and the female got very, very aggressive to the point where you really can't even come near the glass. You can see here, these are a lot of baby fish, a lot of fry, so they have huge clutches. This might be somewhere in the neighborhood between 500 and 800 fry. It's a lot. So as we start to think about these fish, I want to talk a little bit more about tank size and tank mates. This is a fish, whether we're talking about Red Devils or the Midas Cichlid here, this is a very aggressive fish. And they also can get quite large. With the males getting close to a foot, maybe slightly larger, and the females that 9-inch mark, a larger tank is going to be necessary. With the way that we're keeping them here, one male, one female, even that can be risky. So often what people do, what I would do if I have any problems, is just keep this one male in a 75-gallon by itself. And I really do think to show off his personality and to give him the space that he wants, a 75-gallon is a minimum tank size that I would use for a full-grown Red Devil or Midas Cichlid male. For a pair, this 75-gallon, I recognize even this could potentially be a little bit small. I may very well have to remove this female after they breed or at any point while they're together. So I'm always keeping a very close eye on this. Ideally, if you're going to keep them in the same tank, you're going to want to give the female a place to hide. As it turns out, she's kind of built that. They built a structure where it's a cave structure that's just completely covered in gravel that she can escape to, that there is no way that the male can get in here, Roger can get in there. And again, so when it comes to tank mates, there are some fish out there that might be popular to keep or try to keep with Red Devils or Midas Cichlids, things like Oscars. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I personally don't find Oscars to be very aggressive. I've done a species profile on them before. I'll put it in the right-hand corner, and I will put it in the description below. But Oscars, while they're big fish, they don't tend to be overly aggressive. So if we're looking for tank mates, the Red Devils, Midas Cichlids might pair up. You might be looking at Jack Dempsey's, Green Terrors. But again, you're really pushing it here. And when we're talking about tank mates, we're talking about absolutely enormous tanks. Certainly in the 180 180 gallon or over, preferably a tank that's at 210, 220, 240, where they have a little bit of space. Ideally, if you're going to try tank mates for fish that are this aggressive, you're going to want to start them young at the juvenile stage, maybe just a couple of inches, and see if they can work out their territorial disputes early on. You can see here the cave structure that Ruby has kind of to escape to, but see if they can work out their disputes early on, and if they can't, be ready to have a backup plan, especially with aggressive Central and South American cichlids. You have to be ready to move fish at a moment's notice if they start to turn on one another. Now, I have been successfully able to keep these Midas cichlids with bristlenose plecos because I always give the bristlenose plecos a place to escape to. They generally come out at night, they do their thing, they keep the tanks relatively algae free, but you almost never see them during the day because when these guys are out, they're just too aggressive. But again, choose tank mates wisely. Your best bet is probably just to have a male and let that be your water pet. Again, we've already talked about water parameters. Feeding these fish is extremely easy to do. From the size of roughly 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, my fish were taking crushed flakes, micro pellets without any issues. In fact, I can't remember anything that I've ever thrown in the tank that they haven't eaten. So Hikari food sticks, flake food, they love frozen bloodworms, frozen brine shrimp. They are not picky. And the fry, as you can see here, are aggressive in terms of moving around. And this is just, these fry are just a couple days old and they're already moving all around the tank. They have taken readily to live baby brine, crushed flake. They're really not overly difficult to feed. Obviously, there's a big challenge when it comes to the fry, and that is, what are you going to do with 500 to 800 Midas cichlid or Red Devil fry? There just isn't a market for that many fish, and so one of the things that you'll have to consider is potentially culling the fry down, because you can't keep this many fish and expect enough customers out there to want these fish. And certainly there isn't enough space in most people's fish rooms to have 800 Red Devil or Midas cichlid fry. When it comes to tank decorations, I would highly recommend keep it simple. Don't try to aquascape a fish tank for these fish. They are going to destroy the tank. They're going to destroy your aquascaping efforts. If you want to add rocks, I would actually add the rocks before the substrate. These fish, both Midas cichlids and Red Devils, are prolific diggers. They will dig massive pits of gravel and sand and spit it all over the tank, huge mounds everywhere. There's almost no point in trying to straighten it out, because if you do, within a couple hours, they will have it right back to the way they had it. Just let them have the tank, let them do what they want with it. Be careful with hang on the back filters, even with heaters. Make sure that they are secure, hopefully in a place that's going to minimize the contact between the fish and those pieces of equipment, because they are tank buster type fish. When you've got a fish tank lid and you do need one with these fish, make sure that that fish tank lid is held tightly down, that there's something on the top of that tank that weights it down. I have seen both of these fish aggressively go after food. When we had the plastic on the 40-gallon breeder, they had knocked that thing off or into the tank a number of times, so please make sure your lid is very tight fitting. Again, decor, make sure it is secure, and I wouldn't really worry about having a great looking aquascape tank with these fish, because it's probably not going to last very long. If you are interested in breeding them, I would just make sure you have a flat surface. They will lay eggs in caves. For us, they laid eggs a number of times on rocks in the 40-gallon breeder. They would often fungus up. Here, they liked the inside of this plastic fake log-looking thing, and they laid the eggs on the roof of that, and it worked out just fine. But they're really not super picky about where they lay the eggs. But again, once they do that, if you've got any other fish in the tank, you're going to want to remove them quickly, because they will kill anything in there when they have fry. They aggressively protect their fry. They're fantastic parents. If you're an experienced fish keeper with a lot of space, this is definitely a fish to try. They are super aggressive, but their personalities are second to none. We've done a number of top 5 lists in our fish room in terms of our favorite fish, and they almost always make that list just because of their personality, the way they interact. Now that they're in the 75-gallon, Roger, the large male here, he follows me back and forth, is constantly watching me. The interaction between the Red Devil or Midas Cichlid and their owner is second to none. They're fantastic fish. There are going to be challenges when it comes to their aggression. There are certainly challenges with managing this number of fry. There's things that you're gonna have to do to try to reduce that number, because there's no way you're gonna be able to raise 800 fry that are gonna get to the size that these fish get to, but great fish. So if you found this useful, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.